Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we'd do a thrift store haul. Mentioned in my previous video that I hadn't been to the thrift store for a while because I was cleaning up the basement, and I ended up buying a computer that cost me about $900, and I'm still paying back my savings for that $900. I've gotten it down to about uh, well, there was other stuff as well, but anyways, I got 200 towards it now, so I think I'm down to around 700. So not too bad, but I'm still pecking away. As I said, any any money that's coming in for me that gets e-transferred, I put it into the savings to pay it back. Any money that I get cash, I use it to buy stuff in order to resell or add to my library. All right, and this is going to be a good one because I got some really good stuff. I hadn't been out to the thrift stores in a while, and I guess the stuff built up, and people weren't picking half the stuff up because I got some really good stuff. So um, and I thought I'd show it, and I don't think it's going to be too long. So let's get to it. Okay. All right. So um, let's start with this one. All right. So if you watch any of my previous videos, you know I'm a really big fan of the Broadview softcover books. You know, these academic books put out by the Canadian publisher Broadview. Um, they put out a lot of mainstream, classical works for in academic circles for students and things like that. They're extremely good. I mean, they outshine everybody. I think the only maybe the Oxford classics, the Oxford world's classics. Maybe there is some criticism and academic stuff that in those, and there is a bit in the Penguin classics as well, but nothing compared to these books. These books are just head and shoulders above all. The only ones that came close were the Nortons. Remember the old Nortons that used to come out? Uh, they would do a really good critical analysis um, of classic novels and things like that. But I don't think they're publishing anymore because I don't see them around anymore. The only thing I see is the Norton Anthology of English Literature, the Norton Anthology of American Literature, that kind of thing, right? Um, so these Broadview editions really fill the hole if you're academically minded. Like, see, I didn't grow up with very much money, so I ended up reaching college. Actually, I had to leave college. College in Canada is different than college in the United States. College is like an alternative that you would go to um, instead of, let's say, a university, right? Whereas a college is usually like a section of a university in the United States. At least that's how uh, I see it, anyways. Looks like that. Um, so in Canada, after you finish high school, you you choose to go to college or you choose to go to university. Now it's different in Quebec. In Quebec, you have 2 years of CEGEP, CEGEP. It stands for Collège de something. I don't know. I'll put it here. It's in French, anyways. So basically, you would do 2 years of pre-university in Quebec, and then you'd go off to university after that, or you do 3 years of a comprehensive course load of something, and then you would be finished post-secondary education. So it combined kind of part of high school because at the time that I was going, uh, in in some parts of Canada it would go up to grade 12 or grade 13, but in Quebec it would only go up to grade 11, and then you do 2 years of CEGEP, and then you move on to university, right? So, or you take 3 years of college. In 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 much of Canada now, CEGEP is only in Quebec. The other provinces, you'll have a college that you'll go to learn certain trades and things like that, and maybe to be a nurse or things like that. Or if you're more academic or higher level learning, you would go to university and take a 4 year, bachelor's course, and then move on to a master's, and like a PhD or whatever, right? Um, so it just depends. So I got up to this at the time that I was going to school. I was in Quebec and I went to CEGEP for a couple of years, but then I had to leave school because I didn't have any money, right? So I had to go find work. So, um, but then I did go back and I did get a college degree, but I never got to university. So So the things about these is really cool because what I did was I said just because it didn't have any money, all right, and I'm not going to get a a BA or a PhD after my name. It doesn't mean I can't learn everything that everybody else is learning in university that has money or whatever or parents to help them or whatever, right? So I just basically I got a job at a bookstore. I started reading voraciously, and I got an education on my own. It's not as good as a university education because you have a teacher that knows a lot of stuff and he can pass that knowledge on to you. And where you're getting stuck, he can open doors for you in your knowledge and your learning. But if you're at home and you're reading the book on your own, you kind of got to fend for yourself and have a dictionary and a thesaurus and other things around you. Oxford companions are really, the Cambridge companions are really good for that. But nothing really is a substitute for an actual professor, right? So these ones are really good if you like to read the book, number one, and number two, you want to learn more about it as well. So this one is Gulliver's Travels, so the Swift satire from what the 18th century, right? And this one has basically the book itself, and then a bunch of criticism and in-depth study of the actual novel itself. But the one I really wanted to show you was this one. This one is Heart of Darkness. The Joseph Conrad novel. Well, novella. It was short. That Apocalypse Now. The Francis Ford Coppola film was based on, except they moved it from the Congo and they moved it to Vietnam. So in this book, this is basically kind of like the memoirs of Conrad when he was in Africa, going. I think it was the Nile River he was going down, and all the BS that he ended up going through on a boat going down the Nile or whatever in the Congo, and he kind of transplanted. Uh, he made a novella out of it that has become one of the classical novellas of all time. And then Coppola picked that up and got the screenplay written where they moved it to Vietnam to make it more topical. And a lot of the things that happened in the movie happened here, but the stories are totally different. One takes place in Africa, the other one is in Asia, right? So, but this one, okay, so this is a really good example. Now, the novella is very small, right? So if Broadview is going to put out a text for it, it's not as large as, let's say, Gulliver's Travels, if you notice, right? But they really went overboard when it comes to this one. So if you're looking for um, this book, if you're looking for this book, then this is probably the best edition that you can find, because not only does it go through the whole story, but also um, they get into Conrad's letters and stuff while he was in the Congo, and they put that in there too, so you get to read what Conrad was writing at the time when he was in the Congo, right? That this story is based on, right? And also other things. So not only do you get the book, but you also get some more of Conrad's stuff, and also a lot of academic stuff that's around it as well. These editions are extremely good. The thing about them is that they don't sell very well though. Like the Penguins and the Oxfords sell quicker than these ones do when I'm selling books, right? So it's kind of disappointing, maybe because they're a Canadian publisher and it's they only sell books in Canada. I'm not sure, but so they're not as well known. That would be my guess, anyways. All right, so next up is Romeo and Juliet. I already covered this book in a previous video. Basically, No Fear Shakespeare. It's the novel, or sorry, it's the play where one side you have Shakespeare's words, and on the other side you have modern English translation of his words. So you understand the play. Hence, no fear. Don't fear. You have to read Shakespeare's words in that old English that nobody understands, um, which is untrue, by the way. But you get the modern translation. What I found was if you actually read Shakespeare, I think you get. Well, with me, it was after the third play that I read that I kind of started getting a hang of the language, and then I could read uh, other plays without having to refer to, notes or other books on what they mean. There was this There's this set of Brown books. I can't remember. It may have been the hardcover Croft Classics of, but Don't hold me to that. They're little brown books of each play, and what you do is you would open them up, and on one side you would have the play, and then on the other side it would tell you certain words, and they give the definition on the other side for words that seem to be complicated or words that you think you know, but they actually had a little bit of a different meaning back in Shakespeare's day. And it really explained that. And after you learn the language of Shakespeare and the words that he uses through his plays, you understand what he's saying, and then you don't have to, refer to anything. You can just read the play, and once you read the play, you realize that Shakespeare is the greatest writer in the English language, hands down. It just blows you away how like really really good his writing is, right? So, um, but until you get over that hump of the language barrier, because the English back in the 15 and 1600s, he wrote in the late 15, early 1600s, most of his plays came out, right? So in that era, the English was a lot different than it is now, right? So that's what these things come in to help you with, right? So if you see them and you want to pick up Shakespeare and you're intimidated by the language, these are the perfect books for you, all right? What's up next? Tacitus, The Histories. Okay, here's a Penguin classic, like I said. These are more popular than these Broadviews, but don't know why. Anyway, so this is basically, I think this is when Nero. Okay, so Nero ended up dying or was killed. I can't remember which one. And then the Roman Empire has no leader. And what happened in the next year, you had like 4 or 5 leaders take over, right? And what this history is Tacitus's, his surviving histories. One of them is about that year of turmoil in the Roman Empire around 60, 70 AD, something like that, where there was this year of uh, of turmoil where you had like 4 or 5 different emperors in like one year, and he goes through it uh, in this book. All right, so that's the history is by Tacitus. All right, next up is the Dancing Wu Li Masters. All right, so this is basically a perennial classic from Harper Collins. These are really nice. I have another one too here. Where is it? There it is. These are really, really nice additions when, here's another one. If you look at the spine, right? Really nice additions when you put them on the shelf. They look really good when you get a whole row of them. This design, it was like really awesome. And they really do a good job in selecting which ones are going to be in the perennial classics. Sometimes they're not as the mainstream classical works that you see all the time, like Jane Austen or George Eliot and that kind of thing. They kind of add different ones to it that give it a little bit more of a flavor, right? So, and this one isn't even a novel; it's basically a science book. This is basically about quantum physics. Basically, it's about quantum physics. It's called The Dancing Wu Li. Is what is Wu Li? I think Wu Li is physics. Does it mean physics? I think it means physics. Let me double check in Chinese if I remember. Wu Li is the Chinese phrase for physics. Yeah, okay. So Wu Li is physics, the dancing Wu Li master. So basically, he in everyday language goes through quantum physics, the theory of relativity and all that in a really enjoyable way. He puts it forward, right? So even the layman can read it and enjoy it. So he's not only explaining quantum physics to the average everyman, right? But he's writing it in a way that it's like a storytelling type of thing, and so you get involved in the story as well. It's not just academic science dry. You need to take 6 liters of water just to make your mouth undry, right? That kind of thing. So, and they added it to the perennial classic, so they have high regard for it. All right, so after the Dancing Wu Masters, here's the second perennial classic. It's called Giant, and it's written by Edna Ferber, and it won the Pulitzer. All right, so this one, I think this one won the Pulitzer as well. If it didn't, it won the book award. But I seem to be picking up a lot of Pulitzer-winning novels. This is Giant. This is a Pulitzer-winning novel. Basically, it's about the cattle barons of the West or whatever, those guys, right? So um, this sweeping tale captures the essence of Texas on a staggering scale as it chronicles the life and times of cattleman Jordan Bick Benedict, his naive young society wife, and three generations of land-rich sons. A sensational story of power, love, cattle barons, and oil tycoons. Giant. All right. So uh, I have not read it, so I'm not sure how good it is. All right. Next up is the short stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, when F. Scott Fitzgerald was alive and writing back in the 1920s or whatever, um, it's his novels that ended up becoming most famous for him. But he was extremely well regarded for his short stories, even more so than his novels. Um, and it's his novels that gained over time as time went by after his death and everything. They gained more and more stature, and his short stories uh, and his novellas ended up moving to the background. But this is all the best of it. So who put out? Simon and Schuster put this out, and basically it's all of his best novellas and his short stories all in one. So when I saw that on the shelf, I said, I think this will resell pretty good. So I picked it up. Now we have Leonard Cohen. All right, Book of Longing. Now, Leonard Cohen in the '90s, he came out with a book of of poetry. What the hell was the name of that? It was like in a bluish black cover. Uh, what the hell was the name of that? I wonder if it says here. Stranger Music. Yeah. Okay. So Stranger Music, and then like this one, which was published like almost a decade later, if I remember correctly. The Book of Longing is his last book of poetry before his death. All right, and it's cool how he did it was he ended up getting into artistry as well. So he kind of writes a poem, but he also did the illustrations for the novel for the book as well. Right. But it's his last book of poetry, and I found it at the thrift store, so I picked it up. All right, now you got the greatest novel of the Beat generation of the Beats. That's Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Him and his friend go on the road and travel all over the United States, and it's basically his memoirs of that writing. Sorry, of those trips or whatever, right? And it's one of the greatest novels in American literature. All right, and we have the Double Helix. So this is James D. Watson. Him and what was the name of the other guy? Crichton? Crick. So him and Crick discovered the double helix, the DNA, the source of life in the universe. All right, and he tells the story of how him and Crick went about doing it because they were under a time constraint because others were trying to discover it as well, and they ended up winning the race. And this is his recounting of that um, period of time in his life and them discovering, winning the Nobel Prize and discovering, the source of DNA and all that, right? So, um, all right. So what else here? Let's do this. All right. So I also found this Legend series, which is basically the complete Sherlock Holmes, which was on British television back in it was in the 1950s, right? 1954 and 1955. And there was 39 episodes, and all 39 episodes are here on 3 DVDs. And I found this a few times, and every time I found it, I have it in my library actually. Um, and every time I found it and resold it, it sells really easily. Because if you wanna watch Sherlock Holmes stuff, I mean, you can watch the modern colored version with Robert Downey Jr. Those two movies I find them really enjoyable. Um, but the original ones on British television back in the 1950s, these ones were really good as well. If you like that style of that investigative detective work kind of thing, right? Um, all right, so let's do some CDs. What do we have here? We have Ill Communication, which is I think the Beastie Boys came out in '94, if I remember correctly. Yes, Beastie Boys' fourth album after Check Your Head. So I think you had License to Ill, which is probably their greatest um, album, and then you had Paul's Boutique. So almost everybody, if they don't think License to Ill is their best album, they usually think Paul's Boutique, which is their second album, is their best. So people will argue, and they're usually arguing between the first two albums, right? But me personally, and then Check Your Head came out next, and it was kind of like a bit of a departure. from Paul's Boutique and License to Ill, but then they came out with this one afterwards, which is Ill Communication, and this one is kind of in a similar vein as Check Your Head, but I find this one much better than Check Your Head, and other people don't. In fact, this is my, except for License to Ill, I think this is my favorite Beastie Boys album. I listen to this more than any other than License to Ill, right? So if you haven't listened to Beastie Boys, it's basically, see, Beastie Boys are a New York East Coast hip hop group, but they started off as a punk band. You know, they're a bunch of young Jewish guys that got into like punk music, and so they started, playing their instruments and playing punk music, and then they got like, they heard hip hop and they said we got to do that because that, you know, so but they brought like a punk attitude and a punk aesthetic into hip hop, right? And so their first hit, which was "You Got to Fight for Your Right to Party," right? It had that punk element plus a hip hop element, right? Now most hip hop during that time was, they would find like different beats off of records and put those beats together and then rap off these beats, right? So they weren't as much musicians as they were rappers. And then you'd have like a DJ behind putting all the mixes of the songs together, and it'd be sampling everywhere, and then sampling started to go to the wayside because of all the copyright problems, right? So, but what the Beastie Boys did, they sampled just as much as every other hip hop group, but what they did was they also played instruments, right? So you would hear like a punk aesthetic in a hip hop song. So it kind of like a mix of rock and rap before new metal kind of came out, with oh, what were those two bands? The two big bands were Rage Against the Machine and what was that Fred Durst's band? Fred Durst. I'll put it up here, anyways. Uh, you know, Ignorant intellectual. My brains turn into mush as I get older. Um, anyways, so that band, right, that new metal sound that came out, in the late '90s or whatever, right? They were kind of like pioneers of that without actually being part of that sound. You know what I mean? They kind of mixed, a rock slash punk type of sound into the music, and it was similar. The only other band that you saw that did that was Run DMC, right? They had all that kind of rock uh, sampling more, right? Than it was like more of like funk or jazz or R&B and that kind of thing, right? Um, so yeah, so the Beastie Boys are great, but they originally were a punk band. All right, okay, so that's, speaking of punk, I found this one, The Gang's All Here, which is the Dropkick Murphys' second album. And the Dropkick Murphys, this came out in '99 on, what was it? Were they still with Hellcat? Yeah, they were with Hellcat. Um, Hellcat Records. And they're basically a Celtic, Irish punk band, right? So you got, that Irish sound and punk kind of mixed together. So it's kind of uh, pleasing in my mind. And, you know, they got an attitude and everything else, right? So if you haven't listened to the Dropkick Murphys, give them a shot, see what you think. And the other last CD that I found was Aja by Steely Dan. It was this their fifth or sixth album, and this is basically probably, I mean, Gary Katz produced this, but man, they really smoothed this one out. So basically, if you haven't listened to Steely Dan, I didn't like them when I first heard them when I was in my teens and early 20s, but as I gotten older, their sound kind of, I think they're an older person's sound, you know what I mean? Like you're in your 40s and 50s and things like that, and you listen to Steely Dan because they have this really, really smooth type of music, and it's kind of like a mix of jazz and smooth jazz and rock, kind of all this instrumentation all put together in like this mellow, flowing uh, sound, right? And this one, I think, out of all of them, is probably the best produced out of all of their albums. Um, some people say it's overproduced so much that they don't like it much, but I don't know if this is my favorite one. I'm not sure. I would have to go through their albums again, but this is up there as one of my favorite albums. So uh, Deacon Blues, Home at Last, I Got the News. Extremely good album if you like kind of mellow jazz rock, right? Okay, we'll do a movie here. let's do a movie. Okay, so Tears of the Sun. All right, this is Bruce Willis. Uh, Antoine Fuqua directed this, and I collect Antoine Fuqua. So I have this on DVD, but I didn't have it on Blu-ray yet, and I found it. All right, so I picked it up, and it's basically the story of, he's a military man. Bruce Willis is in this, and I can't remember the African nation. Which one was it? It took place. Anyways, there's an African country that ended up. Um, I think their leader was assassinated or something. They were going into a civil war. It looked like. So the American military or brass, whatever, sent a group of men led by Bruce Willis to go get this doctor who was helping out the natives in a section of that country, right? So they were going in to get her out because she's an American citizen. Ends up being what's her name from The Matrix, and what was her name? Monica Bellucci. Anyways, um, she was one of the characters. I saw her first in one of the Matrix films, and then I saw her in that Gaspar Noé film. That was like a real change. Let me put it that way. That uh, attack scene in that Gaspar Noé film, Irreversible. Have you ever seen that film? My goodness, watch that film. Get your mind like screwed up. Anyways, Gaspar Noé is quite an interesting director. Let's put it that way. Um, anyway, so Monica Bellucci is a doctor in let's say it's the Congo. I don't know if it's the Congo. Where was it? I'm wasting your time, aren't I? Beautiful doctor refuses to abandon the refugees. War-torn Africa. I just say Africa. All right. So, but basically, she's in there. She's helping refugees because of this civil war or this fight that's going on. And Bruce Willis goes in with his team to get her out of there, and then she refuses to leave. And basically, she convinces them to tell the brass to go F themselves and try to get her and the refugees because she wasn't willing to leave them behind to be slaughtered by all the militants or whatever. So they try to get them out of the country, and it's like everybody's on their heels trying to kill them or whatever, right? So it's not the greatest of all films, but it is I don't know if you'd call it a fun watch, but at least it's an adventurous action watch. Um, so that's the Tears of the Sun, and then I found this one, uh, a nice steelbook. Got the fan on. All right, a nice steelbook of The Shawshank Redemption. I'm assuming you've seen this film. Probably 100 million people at least have seen this film. Basically starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Tim Robbins is wrongly convicted of a crime, and he ends up going into Shawshank, which is a prison, and then he ends up he's extremely smart, right? And so the warden and the prison guards all use him to do their accounting, and he ends up manipulating them and ends up escaping, right? And I don't know why, but maybe you can explain it to me in the comments. Why is this has been the number one film in the IMDb's top 250 films of all time. In the voting process, this has been number one since time immemorial, right? And number two is The Godfather, right? Or is it number three, The Godfather? Anyways, The Godfather usually trails it, and I prefer The Godfather over this film easily, right? But this one, for some reason, always ranks number one. You have, after the Batman films came out, the Nolan films and the Lord of the Rings came out. You got those up there, the Batman films and Lord of the Rings are up there, but nothing has usurped The Shawshank Redemption um, in the IMDb top 250. It's been there since I looked at the top 250, right? Um, it's a good film, but I don't think it's like the greatest film of all time. I wouldn't even put it in my top 10. But basically, Tim Robbins, like I said, he's an accountant, and he ends up helping out, the warden and others. But he uses that freedom that he gets. They end up trusting him, because he's not a violent offender. Uh, I can't remember what he was accused of and convicted. I think it might have been the murder of his wife, but he didn't do it, right? Um, so, uh, anyways, he escapes, and Morgan Freeman plays his friend in prison. And when Morgan Freeman gets out of prison, he doesn't escape. He gets out. He ends up going to find Tim Robbins, and they kind of live on an island somewhere in the Pacific or something, um, as free men, right? So, anyways, it's quite a good film, but it's not the greatest. But now I have it on Blu-ray, uh, Steelbook, and these are my favorite. I think I've come to the conclusion. All right, I think I've come to the conclusion that I don't care about 4K really. I mean, well, let's put it this way. How I do my collection is I have, let's say, 5 or 6 thousand films that I really enjoy, or like I want to have a half decent uh, film library, but I don't want to go crazy where my house is just filled from front to back of films. It's got to be down here in the basement, and I've basically filled out the basement. I mean, I have spaces on shelves for things, but I've pretty much filled up most of the shelves with basically the films that I enjoy. Now there are other ones that I haven't found yet that I want to add, but overall it's a pretty good library. All right, so I've been watching the library. Um, where I've been expanding mostly is on the indicators because they're numbered, and the Masters of Cinema from Eureka because they're numbered as well, and the Criterion Collection because they're numbered. So as I find them numbers in the collections that I don't have, I add them. But when it comes to the regular films, what I seem to be doing mostly is just upgrading. So I have a DVD, and then I find the Blu-rays or replace the DVD with the Blu-ray. If I find the 4K, then I'll replace the Blu-ray with the 4K, but only if I can find the 4K cheap. All right, I'm not going to spend $25 on a used 4K disc because the jump from Blu-ray to 4K, I don't notice it because I don't have a 4K television. I have a 4K player that will play those movies, but I don't have a 4K television yet. I'm not going to, throw out a $800 or $1,000 television in order to get a 4K television because 4K came out in the last few years, right? So once one of my um, TV dies, then I'll replace it with a 4K one, and then maybe I'll be more interested in 4Ks. But I've come to the conclusion presently that what I really, really want for my favorite films or the great films that are in my library is a Blu-ray steelbook for it, or those nice box sets that Arrow comes out with, um, something like that. There's a nice box set, right? But it usually comes with a booklet, and it's usually just one film, like Last House on the Left, like that with the poster and everything. I really like these editions. Um, so uh, those editions, or a steelbook Blu-ray, or a steelbook 4K for that matter. But if it's a if it's a choice between a Blu-ray steelbook and a regular 4K, the 4K is being sold, and I'm going to keep the Blu-ray steelbook because the jump to 4K, I don't notice it much, and I really like the aesthetic look of a steelbook. But like I said, I'm not going to spend an arm and a leg to get them or anything. This one I got, if I can get a steelbook for under $20, especially if it still has the J card, I'll pick it up. So I don't know how many. I think I have maybe 50 or so steelbooks in my collection so far. But basically, what I'm doing is replacing. I have the DVD, and then I find the Blu-ray, replace the Blu-ray with the DVD with the Blu-ray, and if I find a 4K for like a reasonable price, like under $10, maybe I'll pick that up depending on which movie. But probably 90% of all films don't really need anything higher than maybe a Blu-ray, um, because they're dramas or action films or whatever. It's those those space films, the sci-fis and the the fantasy films and everything where you got a lot of special effects, and animated films. Um, those are the ones that really do well on 4K that you want to upgrade. Otherwise, I don't. What's the difference between a 4K if you're watching Schindler's List or something, you know what I mean? I mean, you see it really clear, and it is true that the 4Ks, you know, looked really good in black and white. Like they really grabbed the blacks and the whites and the grays in 4K in a black and white film, right? So, um, but with the colored films, the jump, I don't know. Is it going to make any difference for me to watch? I don't know, some kind of Wonderful on Blu-ray or on 4K? It's basically, a kids drama or whatever, a drama, a romantic comedy, that kind of thing. Does it really matter? No, but if you're watching, let's say, Star Wars or Star Trek films or some science fiction films where you see all the space and everything, that would be cool, right? The clearer it is, the cooler it is. Although when you get really clear, sometimes you see what the director didn't want you to see because he knew that the film that he was using is only so clear, so he could get away with, let's say, using models and things like that, shrunken things that make it look like it's outer space, but it's not. And then you get the really, really clear 4K, and you go, oh, that's a model. It easily sees that as a model, right? So sometimes you gotta, it'd be like, remember Ray Harryhausen? I have his monster movies over there, with all the Sinbad films and everything. I think if you got those really, really super clear, the stop animation of all the monsters is going to be so clear that you're going to see that that's basically a statue. You know what I mean? It's the clearer it is, kind of the worse it is because the less you can imagine that it's real, right? So sometimes it you know takes it back. All right, so that's Sherlock Holmes and the Shawshank Redemption and Tears of the Sun. Let's go back to some books. I have a couple of paperbacks here. Brave New World, I've talked numerous times about, probably the greatest dystopian, greatest science fiction novel of all time, in my opinion. And I've also talked about this one before, which is Salinger's best novel, or his only novel, actually, Catcher in the Riots. Teen angst, up the yin yang. It was considered one of the greatest novels of all time, and of teen rebellion, right? So everybody still reads it now. Let's do this book. Um, if you watch previous videos, I collect the Everyman Library, the original Everyman Library, and its replacement in the 90s. I collect the Modern Library, the originals, not the replacements that came in the 90s because they're not numbered. And I collect, you know, uh, Easton Press or the Franklin Library, or what's the third one? I can't remember. Anyways, there's a third one, the box ones, Folio Society books of books that I've read, and I want like a nice keepsake of the book that I read. I will get a leatherbound edition of it or whatever, right? But I don't really collect the leatherbounds or the folios unless I've read that book, and I want a keepsake because there's just too many of them, and they're all super expensive most of the time. Anyway, but part of the modern library um, is some of the books are too big to put into the small pocket book size of the modern library, the Everman library. And what the modern library did to solve that was they made, the giants, and these ones are the larger ones. So I found this one, which is the Life of Samuel Johnson. All right, and it's the Modern Library G2, and I didn't have it. I had one and I had three, but I didn't have G2. So I'm going to put this in Mylar, and it'll be an extension. This is basically um, one of the great biographies or one of the great memoirs or whatever, right, of literary history. I have not read it though. I'm not a big fan of biography. I have read Benjamin Franklin's biography, but like the Diary of Samuel Pepys or that one or others. Um, I didn't really have an interest in reading it as much, but some people really enjoy reading biographies, right, or autobiographies, right? Okay, let's do these two. I actually went to one thrift store, found the complete works of Oscar Wilde, and then went to another thrift store and found a second book of the works of Oscar Wilde. So I have two of them. Complete one. I think this one is pretty complete as well. It has his novel, uh, and his major plays and his short stories, and so does this one. Right, both in nice hardcover. Found them for like $4. All right. So Oscar Wilde is one of the more popular writers um, in classic literature, so they're not too hard to resell. All right, let's talk about this film. I've shown this film before, but I hadn't watched it yet. So this is the one film that I watched since the last. I watched the Jessica Alba film on Netflix, is it, or Amazon? I watched that film where she's like a an army person, and she ends up her dad ends up being murdered, and she investigates the murder back in wherever it is. Right, it was quite a fun film to watch, but I just watched it because Jessica Alba is in it, and she's got that screen presence. So, um, but what I did want to watch is after I got that was this, and that's The Virgin Suicides. Basically, this is Sofia Coppola's film. I wonder if this one was her first. Anyways, it was put out in 1999, and it made me a fan of Sofia Coppola, who's Francis Ford Coppola's daughter, right? Um, so it's basically about one, two, three, four, I think five daughters, ranging from ages of 13 to 16 or 17. These five daughters of this school teacher and stay-at-home mom, played by Kathleen Turner, who's extremely strict, and James Wood plays the father. And Kirsten Dunst is in it, one of her first roles. Um, anyways, so these five daughters end up all committing suicide throughout by the end of the film, and it goes through these four or five boys. Like one of the boys narrates the film and trying to explain in his head and to the audience why it happened and everything. It's one of the saddest films I've ever watched. It's quirky, it's funny at times, but overall, it's just it's really depressing because I can put myself in, let's say, James Wood's position where I have like this family now. Kathleen Turner is a real strict person. She doesn't let the daughters out of the house at all, and when they do actually get out, they kind of go overboard because of it. But then she puts in more strict rules, and you can see if you ever been brought up in a house with a lot of kids in it, there's a lot of strict rules, just to keep the parents sane, but they do take a toll on the kids and their development, right? Um, so yeah, it's an extremely depressing movie. It made me a fan of Sofia Coppola, and I've collected her films ever since, right? So if you haven't seen The Virgin Suicides, so this one is a Criterion Collection edition, so it looks like Criterion really likes it as well. And it's number 920 in the collection. All right, um, so that's that. Okay, so lastly, and this is the reason why I made this video, is when you go out to thrift stores, you will find the average thing here. There are books, paperbacks, movies, usually DVDs, not as much, but you will find an occasionally good Blu-ray as well. You rarely ever find any 4Ks in thrift stores that I think I maybe found two in all the time that I've looked in all the thrift stores. Um, you will find Blu-rays, but what you usually will get is DVDs. So if you want to create a DVD library on the cheap, just go to thrift stores. You're going to find every movie that was popular and even the ones that aren't as popular because people are just getting rid of their libraries of DVDs, right? You can make an amazing DVD collection of movies, a movie collection in your house of DVDs, not paying more than a buck or two uh, for a DVD, right? So that's how I started, and I ended up having like maybe 5,000 DVDs, and slowly, as I found Blu-rays, I've replaced the DVDs with the Blu-rays. But I just mentioned that, right? So, but you rarely find good Blu-rays. You rarely find, in fact, I don't think I've ever found any boutique cinema stuff like from Arrow or Indicator or the Masters of Cinema or Shout Factory or Scream Factory. I think I found a couple of Kino Lobers, but not much of anything else. The one that you will find more often, but still it's rare, is Criterion's. And I don't think I've ever found a Criterion Blu-ray or 4K, but I have found numerous DVDs, Criterion DVDs, but it's few and far between. Usually what happens is somebody drops their library, and then you get an influx of, let's say, Criterions. Like one time I was at a thrift store and I found like 15 Criterions, probably all from the same library. But then you won't find any criterions for 6 months or something, right? So except for the Royal Tenenbaums or the Kevin Smith film. What's that one? Chasing Amy. Those ones you'll find uh, more frequently, especially those two. But you rarely find any criterions as well. And when it comes to books, what you rarely find are the ones that I collect, which is the Modern Library or the Everyman Library or the leather-bound editions, because what people do is usually just pass those on to other people in their family, or they try to resell them, right? And so I rarely have found any Franklin Library or Easton Press. In fact, what I find more than those two are the folios. Folios I've found more often than any leather-bound edition book, right? But the day before yesterday, I was out at the thrift stores, like I said, and I found 6 Franklin Library hardcover, nice leather-bound editions um, of their Pulitzer Prize line of leather-bound editions. So, they put out a bunch of different books here or there. Um, but one of the lines that they were putting out, for subscription was Pulitzer Prize-winning novels. Um, and they started, I think it was 77, and they went up to 87 or 75 to 87. Like Franklin doesn't produce any books anymore because they went out of business around, the turn of the millennium. And but from like 75 to 87, they put out like 75 Pulitzer Prize uh, novels, and I found 6 of them, all from the same guy's library. And I know he bought them new because I don't know why he did it, but he ended up writing his name on the inside first page. He wrote his name, and then when you buy Franklin Libraries, what they do is they give you a sticker um, that has the print, and what you do is you put the sticker um, on the inside of the book that identifies you as the book. So it says Ex Libris Personal Library of, and then your name, right? And you can put that sticker on the inside page so people know that it's your book or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's breaking into somebody's house and stealing their leather-bound editions of books. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if that's a popular thing or not. But all it does is when you write your name in the book and you put that label on the inside of the book, most people who collect books consider it, damage, the book damage. Now, do most people care all that much about it? No, but you can't really sell a book for a really high price that has that kind of thing. Somebody's written in ink, or a sticker label of their name on it um, in the book, right? It's like if you buy a Holy Bible and on the end it says this Bible is dedicated to or a gift of, and then you write the person's name in it on the inside. It kind of makes the Bible less worth worthy, right? Same with these leather bounds, but they still are leather bound editions, and most people buy it. So instead of being able to sell, let's say this for 40 or 50, I may only be able to sell it for maybe 25 or 20, right? So just because of that. But anyway, so this one is The Way West by Guthrie, AJ Guthrie. What was his name? The Way West. It's basically a um, A.B. Guthrie Jr. All right, this won the Pulitzer in 1950. So all these books are Pulitzer-winning books, part of the Pulitzer Library. There's 75 of them altogether. And I found like 6 of them at the thrift store. All right, so this one is The Way West. It's basically about the West during its expansion, right, in the United States. I have not read it, so next up after that is The Keepers of the House. I do not know what this novel is about. I haven't read it. Okay, but it's a really nice edition, right? All right, this one, the Pulitzer, in when does this win? 1965. All right. And then we have, we'll save this one for last. So Scarlet Sister Mary. This one is by Julia Paturkin. All right, and this is basically about an African American girl who's part of a community in I think it's Southern Carolina, but don't quote me on it. Um, and she is having this inner struggle between being a good girl and an outstanding member of her church and a real SLUT, let's put it that way. And Julia Petterkin ends up writing a book about that kind of duality, right? So this one, the Pulitzer in 1929. All right, so that's that one. Here's the next one. This one is a fable by William Faulkner. This is like a World War II book, World War II novel. Um, and it won the Pulitzer in 1955. This is basically, well, it's a fable. It's basically about this corporal. I think he's a corporal, anyways, in World War II, and he's like the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. And what he does is he convinces a whole bunch of his army friends to not fight the Germans anymore. And then when they stop fighting, like 2 or 3 thousand of them or whatever, um, then the war basically stops. It doesn't continue, and all the soldiers, they kind of realize that, well, if you don't fight and the other side doesn't fight, then you don't have a war, do you? But the brass wants this war to continue, so they bring up the corporal on charges, and they end up, I don't know how they kill him. I think they kill him anyways, and the war starts again. So it's kind of like the story of Jesus, and Uh, I think Faulkner thought this book was his best, not The Sound and the Fury. He worked like over a decade on it, if I remember correctly, um, and he was the most proud of this book, and it ended up winning the Pulitzer, right? So extremely good book. If like, because I read The Sound and the Fury, and I read, what was the other one? Is about As I Lay Dying. I think it's As I Lay Dying. And I didn't like Faulkner's work. He's probably considered like the greatest writer in southern United States with Mark Twain or whatever, right? Um, but I didn't like his writing very much, and I haven't read this one, so this one probably it might be one that flips me over onto the other side of the fence when it comes to William Faulkner, right? People really, really think he's great, but all right. So this one I'm going to keep. I'm not going to resell, and it's the reason why I'm going to keep it. I have to double check to see if I have a copy of it already, but I read this book, and this book is an extremely good book. James Agee, A Death in the Family. This is basically almost like a semi-autobiographical book, um, where I think he's a kid. The death in the family is his father, who goes out to see his sick father, or the character's grandfather, because he's sick, and then when he comes back, he ends up dying in a car crash. And what you see is the devastation of his family, because the father ends up dying in a car crash. So you only have the mother and the kids, right? And everything changes, right? And it's one of the most depressing novels I've ever read in my life. If you like depressing novels, pick this one up. It's extremely good. All right. And it won the Pulitzer. Not surprisingly, when did this win the Pulitzer? In 1958. All right. So there was like 75 novels that won the Pulitzer that Franklin put out before they went out of business. And last but not least is The Age of Innocence. Now this has been made into a movie at least once. And the movie I didn't like very much, but the book is extremely good. And Edith Wharton won. This wasn't her first novel either. This is like maybe her eighth novel. Don't quote me on that, but it's a later novel of hers, and it won the Pulitzer in 1921. And this is probably one of the best romance, or The Girl That Got Away books of all time. I don't know. I think pretty much every guy has felt this growing up, and in the dating world before they ended up getting married or whatever. There's always that one girl in their history that kind of got away because either circumstances or something happened in their life. They weren't at the right place mentally or anything else at the time. But man, if they were, that thing would have exploded, right? And it would have been like the romance of a lifetime, right? It's like maybe meeting your, I don't know if you call it the love of your life, but there's just something about some girls, and then you know you end up parting ways or something. Maybe the girl moves because of her parents have moved and now they're halfway across the country, or maybe um, they're involved with another person at the time and you're just patiently waiting, but they end up marrying the person, that kind of thing, or they break up, but then they have no interest in dating because the person that they broke up with treated them like crap, and they don't want to do it again uh, for a while. And then when they do it, you maybe you're involved with somebody else by that time, that kind of thing, right? So there's always these life gets in the way of some of these things that are just would be like these explosions, right? Of anyway, so there's always that girl that gets away. Well, that's what this book is about. It's basically about a guy who is betrothed to a really innocent, nice, beautiful woman, and they're going to get married. But then her cousin comes back from Europe, and she's married to like some duke or whatever, and they're having problems. So she left him and came back to the United States to be with her cousin and her family or whatever. And then there's a spark between the soon-to-be husband or the husband and or the fiance and the cousin, right? Because she's like this world traveled type of girl. She's not innocent. She's not you know um, closed off or anything. She's experienced the world, and there's some sort of flirtation between the two of them, and it's like an electric moment because this girl starts to grow on him, right? And then they finally like things get in the way of them because through like I don't know how long, maybe half the novel, he's like contemplating leaving his fiance to be with her, and she ends up going back to Europe, and because uh, the soon-to-be wife ends up, or the wife ends up after they get married. So they get married quickly because he wants to do right by her, and he doesn't want to think about the girl that he's super attracted to, the cousin. And then she ends up getting pregnant, so she ends up telling the cousin that she's pregnant, and so the cousin feels super guilty now that there's going to be a family. Then she goes back to Europe, and the husband is thinking of leaving his wife and to go chase after her to Europe. But then he finds out from her that is, he finds out from his wife that she's pregnant, and now he can't leave, so he's stuck in it. So they end up staying married, and like 25 years later, the end of the novel comes, and she ends up dying. The wife ends up dying, and the son and the father end up traveling to Europe, and the son looks up his mother's cousin, who was like one of her best friends or whatever, wants to see her, and like the father's with it, and he wants to see her as well, but then he changes his mind and he kind of leaves and let the son goes up and visit with his mother's cousin, and he kind of stays away because he's worried that if he sees her, that whole the idea of it all, that heartache, that spark that might not be there again, and he would miss it too much. Kind of defined him as a person in a way, right? Such a good novel. I don't know. It's like men don't really like romance novels. I'm sorry, and they don't like romance movies. But every once in a while, there's a movie that comes along that is a romance movie, or a book, a novel that's a romance novel that just blows you away, and that blows you away. That you feel it, man. Especially reading it as a guy. I mean, I guess you would feel it, but I'm not a woman, so I don't know. Uh, and it is written by a woman, but if you can place yourself in the shoes of the husband, you could see like it's duty, it's responsibility, it's the things that men were built for since they're born, to take care of their family. Um, But then you have that girl, that fantastic girl, right? You know what I mean? What the secret is to find that fantastic girl and then make her your wife. But sometimes circumstances and life kind of gets in the way of doing that, right? So, and there's always that one girl that, you reminisce about, um, you know, heartache wise, but pleasant wise in the memory, um, as well. And, you know, in real life, you marry the girl that you marry, and hopefully you don't marry her because you just want to be married. You married her because when you look at her, you just go, my God, you know what I mean? And she doesn't have to be the most beautiful woman in the world to somebody else, but when you look at her, there's just something, right? There's just something, you look at her and there's like, yeah, I mean, you know what I mean? You're going to get that feeling, but probably I only had that feeling maybe 3 times in my life, right? And, I married 2 of them. So, um, anyway, so uh, that's when it's worth all the hassle that's involved with marriage and family and kids and everything else is when you look at your wife when she walks by coming out of the kitchen or the bedroom or comes in to the bedroom from the shower, and you just take a look at her and she may be 50 years old and you still see her in that way that you met when you were like 20 or 30, right? That that is that's what you want to pursue. Don't uh, don't just get involved with women just to get involved with them because you're lonely, because you'll get trapped, or some shit may happen that you don't want to happen, and then your responsibility gene kicks in, and you got to do the right thing, right? And now you're trapped, right? So you need to, the only ones that are worth it are the ones when you look at them and you just go, there's just something about that girl, right? That's when it's worth it. All right. Anyways, okay, so I'm digressing. So that is Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence. And I think I already have a copy of this in my library. So I'll probably just resell this version of it. Did I tell you when it won the Pulitzer? I think it was in the 20s, right? Yeah, I think I did already. Okay, so that's everything. So that's all the books. So I end up, whoa, finding they're heavy books, right? So 6 beautiful leather-bound editions of the Franklin Library, and I found them for $5 each. So a Franklin for $5, you don't come along. That doesn't come along very often. So when it does, it's like, now I know why I go to thrift stores, right? So, all right, so that's everything. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing. Um, I would appreciate it. And, well, you have a great day, all right? And I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye for now.